Thank you, Bob.
A little long, sorry.
That's okay. I'm going to just talk a few minutes on some resentments. Oh, he's bringing food over here.
I will split it with Polly.
I've had mine. You didn't have any lunch.
Yes, I did.
Anyway, when I got into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I came, as I had said earlier, through treatment. And I was in a treatment center that was a 5-step treatment center. And while I was in this treatment center, we did a 4-step, but it was one of those, I was born, much like what Bob was talking about when he wrote his life story and took 8 hours to give it. And I gave mine to my counselor, and she critiqued all the stuff and told me different things. And I learned one of the greatest things that I really am grateful for, and I guess it's that thing where there's just no negatives in God's world. Everything has a positive result. And even though I did not do that 4-step in the way that it's laid out in the book, I learned some stuff that was really helpful to me. And one of them is that I never understood my parents. And I had parents who, I'm an only child, and I was very loved, and I had very sacrificing parents for me. They just wanted me to have everything they didn't have. But there were characteristics of my parents that I was so resentful for. And one was my father's anger. My father was a really, really rageful man. Ironically, I became just like him. I was very, very rageful as well. And I talked about that and how my dad's rage was, so fearful, and how I can remember my mom saying things like, just be nice, Polly. We don't want Daddy to have one of his fits. That's the way she would put it. And my mother would just disgust me so much because she wouldn't stand up for herself. And I thought she was such a wimp, and how do you let him do that? And I mean, that would just make me so angry. And it seemed like I'd almost be more angry with her than I was with his rage. I mean, and I just didn't understand it all. And I would say, but these people have just done all these, they've been wonderful parents, they've sacrificed. And what she helped me to understand, and it's one of the things that I do with the women I sponsor. And what she helped me do is she asked me, she says, tell me a little bit about your parents' childhood. And what I was able to do is talk about some of the things that I knew about their childhood. And what I realized is that both of my parents were abused children. And they found each other just like an alcoholic and an Al-Anon. And it's kind of one of those things. Before you tell me, about your childhood, tell me about your parents' childhood. And it helped me to see things that I never would have seen had I not done that. And sometimes when I work with women, we talk about that. We talk about the childhood they have. I have a sponsee that she didn't even get this, and she was talking about her dad and how he treated her and how he never said he loved her. And I said, gosh, well, tell me about your dad's childhood. And she says, oh, my dad lived in an orphanage. I said, oh my, where would he ever learn to tell you he loves you? Who told him they loved him? And what was that helped me so much, because when I started doing the 4-step, the way it's in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, that information was valuable to me. And I use that today with the women I sponsor. I want to know about their parents' childhood. And what happens is by the time we start, then we, as we begin to do the process of their the 4-step they've written, but when they're giving me the 5th step, before they give me the 5th step, I just ask those questions. And after we get to the 4th column, sometimes we can see it from a different perspective. And so what happened for me is when I left treatment and I got Frank as a sponsor, when I got sober in Texas, we do the steps quickly. Get through the steps. So when I got out of treatment, I hadn't been out but a little while, and he says, we're going to do the 4th step. We did the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Now we're going to do the 4th step. We're going to get right at it. And he used to say, put mother at the top of the list. Everybody's angry at mother. And so that's what I did. But by having that other information was really helpful when I did, where was I selfish, self-centered? Where was I selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, and afraid? I was able to see where they, I was able to understand and put myself in their position and see that my father had all that rage. He just absolutely had no way. He was just like me drinking. He was as unable to control that rage as I realized I was unable to control mine. And the dishonesty is I thought he could do something about that. I didn't see that he was powerless over that. And I didn't see that my mother, being treated the way she was as a child, had an exact opposite reaction to the same thing. Both of them had child abuse, but had different reactions. And I was able to see the dishonesty of my mother never having, what she did was she stuffed her anger in, and she never was able to stand up for herself. And why would she be able to stand up to him? So, it's that thing. I once read something, and as Bob was talking about compassion, that I believe is true. And I once read this, that compassion is the highest form of spirituality. Is when I can absolutely remove myself enough to feel something for you. And what that happens is especially when it's the people I love. My mother, my father, my ex-husband. And I had a lot of resentment. My ex-husband was a military man, and he came out of a very abusive home and a lot of rules and having to follow things. He was tailor-made for the military, absolutely tailor-made for the military. And he knew how to follow orders. He knew how to, and I never got it. And I was listening to Bob as he was talking about his marriage and how Karen felt like, you didn't stay home, you were working, you were doing all these other commitments. Well, one of the things that I learned very early in my marriage is if you are married to a military man, his life is not his. It absolutely is not his. And it doesn't matter that you're having a baby. He is going to war. It doesn't matter if that's what's going to happen. Then you better surround yourself with the women in the military and you have the baby. And if your children are sick and you're away and there's no family, you get together and you help each other. And what happened is I resented him for all that. I resented him. But what I didn't realize is that he had chose a career and I had chose to marry him, and he was as powerless over that. The dishonesty was he had no choice in that. And of course, it's all about me. So I thought he deliberately, you could have done something about that if you'd have wanted to. And the truth of it was he couldn't. And what I did, that was my selfishness, wanting him to take care of me, being irresponsible for what he wanted. And the self-seeking was constantly making him feel guilty for choosing the profession he had and being powerless over to do what he did. And I was afraid. And all of the bottom line is I was afraid he was going to die and never come back. The reality of it all. I mean, all of this stuff we get to find out when we start doing these steps and do the 4th step. And I had the Baptist church on my resentment list, and I had the Air Force on my resentment list. Those were some of the things that, other than people, because I truly believed that the Baptist church was what screwed me up. And the Air Force finished. You know, if it hadn't been all those doctors in the Air Force telling me I was suffering from all these psychiatric illnesses and giving me all those drugs and, I mean, you know, in other words, nothing's my fault. I can't take responsibility for anything. So it was doing the 4th and the 5th step was just absolutely. So it's just like what Bob said. Along the way, I didn't have a lot on my first resentment list. I would stay sober in AA and get a lot on my resentment list. My first 4th step, I didn't have a lot on my sexual conduct because I'm married. That was the only man I'd ever had sex with. He was the only person I'd ever been with. And we didn't have sex till after we married because we didn't have birth control and all that kind of stuff. And what's the worst thing in the world is becoming pregnant. I know I didn't do that, you know, before sobriety. I did it sober. But the thing about it is I didn't have all that going on till later on. So I've had many 4 steps that have been very different from the first 4 step. But what the first one did is helped me see him and see differently about him and see my parents. And that was so eye-opening. And to get Marcy White was a woman who was an Al-Anon, and she started a lot of things in alcohol and in our recovery program, and she started like a lot of woman to woman that we have, and many things, especially in Texas. And she used to talk about a thing called the blessing. And she says most of the people who come to Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon do not have the blessing. And the blessing is that we come into this world and we're loved and we're cherished. And what I learned is that I always had the blessing. My parents loved me. They sacrificed for me. They gave to me. They just loved me. And I didn't know that. I guess intellectually I might have, but I really didn't because I couldn't feel it. And what I didn't realize, the reason I couldn't feel it was because of the spiritual malady of alcoholism that I suffered from. And what I realized from that first 4th and 5th step was that I had the blessing. And I didn't know that I had the blessing. And that was so eye-opening, because if you would have told me when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, from my perception, because my mother didn't show me how to stand up and take care of myself because she was such a wimp in my opinion, and my daddy was rageful, I would have told you that that's all I could see. That's all I could see. I couldn't see all the other. So for that, I'm really, really grateful. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about we take a fear inventory. And in the fear inventory, it says that, let me get to where we are. We reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper. Well, I've had a lot of fears. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous says that we are driven by 100 forms of fear. I do not come from, my parents, like I said, my mother worked. And I mean, when I was a little girl, most mothers didn't work. My dad had a 9th grade education. And he was a contractor. He built houses. And so what happened was it seemed like it was always, most of the time, it kind of fell back on my mother because she had a regular job because she was a nurse. And my dad's job was sometimes good and sometimes not so good. And so what I realized is that I had a lot of fear of financial insecurity. One of the things that talks about in our 9th step promises, and the fear of my fear of financial insecurity. I reviewed those fears, and the reason I could see where I'd had those fears as a child, and that we had to move a lot because we'd moved to where my dad was working, and so my fear of financial insecurity was, I was always afraid that we weren't going to have enough money. And, and those things that affected my self-esteem. My mother made all my clothes, and that embarrassed me. I didn't want to have homemade clothes. And that embarrassed me. Yet, my parents would work hard and sacrifice so that I could have gymnastic lessons and dancing lessons, everything a little kid would ever want. They would sacrifice to give me those things. And I had to see where I was dishonest and selfish and self-seeking, where I didn't even see that they were doing that for me. Yet I was afraid of that. And I'm here to tell you that fear of financial insecurity, I still get it. I wish it were just totally gone. But I can tell you, ever since we did lose everything, it's amazing when you lose it all, and there's nothing left to lose, that pretty soon my reliance became on God, and then self-reliance, that God was going to take care of it. And the fear was I wasn't relying on God. If I just get another job, if I'll just work a little harder, Dave will get another, since he wasn't working, if he'll get another, minimum wage job, all of this stuff, that fear of financial insecurity. And because of that fear, it all was a self-fulfilling prophecy for me. Losing the house, filing bankruptcy, all of it. And then when it happened again, and we had to sell our house again, and it looked like we were going to, not sell it, lose all our savings as a result of that, because we had invested it in this house. It was amazing how I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew God was going to take care of it. And sometimes I can go to that fear again, but it seems like I have more, I have more faith. I know that God's there and that I can stop that fear. And I had a lot of fear. I've had a fear that's kind of there that's ever hanging around. One, I never believed I'd live past 60. My dad died at 60. He died of colon cancer. So I was sure I was going to die by I was 60. So I was afraid that I was going to die early like him. Well, we have surpassed that by many years. And, but what I have learned about that my dad didn't know, he didn't know the things we know today. And if I am responsible and take care of myself, and if I take an inventory of why do I have these fears, thoroughly follow these fears. And if I thoroughly review these fears and I see that, okay, you're afraid of illness. Well, what does this affect? It affects my self-esteem. It affects my everything because I am afraid I'm going to be ill. Well, what's my responsibility? What do I need to do here? I need to take care of myself. I need to eat healthy. I need to exercise. When I start to see what I can do and alleviate the fear. Some of us are going to get sick. That's all there is to it. The good news is we live in 2012. And maybe we're going to have a lot better chance of not being as sick as we could have been. Fear of dying. And one of the things that I learned from a person from Don Pritz in AA is to take a fear and unwind it. Like I'm afraid of dying. Why are you afraid of dying? I'm afraid. What are you afraid? Why are you afraid of dying? And just keep going on through the fear and find out, well, I'm afraid of being sick. I'm afraid of having a long illness. And I'm afraid of, you're afraid of dying. I'm afraid of nobody will care. All of these kind of fears. But the ultimate, by the time you unwind it, what's the real fear? I'm afraid there's no God. And so today I try to look at these fears, and they crop up all the time. The fears. Sometimes I come to an AA conference and I'm going to sit down here and I have a lot of admiration for Bob. I'm afraid I'll have a brain fart and I can't remember what I'm supposed to do. But what's really the thing? What's really going on is self-reliance has failed me. And the fear is there because I have not called upon God to help me get through the fear. How am I going to get through the fear? The only way I'm going to get through the fear is to inventory the fear, review it thoroughly, and see that the only thing that I need is to get God to... There's no way I can get rid of this fear by myself. The dishonesty is there's nothing, I can't do enough to get rid of this fear. I need God. I absolutely need God. Self-reliance has failed me. Okay, I'm going to move on to the sex inventory, and then I'll let Bob pick up his two on this. And when I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and when I was told to do my first 4-step, I said, I don't have a sex inventory. I have not cheated. I have not had sex with anybody else but the man I'm married to. Now, I failed to see how I used sex. And one of the things that you go find any military wife who's had a husband who's gone a long time, and we used sex in order to get the things we wanted. And I don't think we're the only ones. I think everybody, all women. I think we were taught that from the cradle, how to use sex to get things from people we needed. So how did I bring harm to him? What did I do to arouse jealousy? Well, the things I would do is I would, go to parties. I'm a terrible flirt. It's no problem at 72. It was a big problem when I was young. That was a big problem. And what I would do is I would arouse jealousy and insecurity in him. And then, and throw things up. Well, if you won't do that for me, I'll find somebody who will. Just mean, hateful stuff. And how I had absolutely harmed him in so many ways. Later on in my sobriety, I would have a lot of a sex inventory. After Dave and I got married at 3.5 years of sobriety, I did a sex inventory of my behavior for the first 3 years in Alcoholics Anonymous. And what I had done is I had harmed so many men in this program because what I wanted is I had used them to try to make myself feel better. And I had used these men, and I had harmed them in a lot of ways. And I had aroused, I was married, and I was using these men. And I was a married woman. I definitely was not an example of what you should be like in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's like, today I want to be an example of Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to be someone who is a married woman, going to conferences, and I've been doing it for a long time, even when I was younger and cute, and all that kind of stuff. And I want to behave like him. I want to be someone that is an example of this program and of what marriage looks like. And I don't want to arouse jealousy in my husband or insecurity. None of those things do I want to do to my husband today. But I would do that to other men, to my first husband. And my husband was ill. He had been 100% medically retired from the military, and he was ill. And I still had no empathy for that. Because what about me? Look what's happened to me. And later on, I would see that inventory. In the sex inventory, and it also talks about harms done. And in that inventory is where I looked at and took an honest look at what I had done to my sons. Because I did not resent my children. I just was guilty and remorseful and felt horrible. I didn't know that I would ever get to a place that I would truly and completely forgive myself for what I had done to my children. I didn't know that I would ever get there. And the harms done in that first inventory that I had to talk about with my sons. And that's when Frank looked at me and said, "Polly, you are a child abuser," and began to tell me the things that I was going to do to make amends to my children. And the other thing later on in my inventory that I did in the sex inventory with the men that I had had relationships with in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I also had a harms done, and that as a result of taking actions based on self that place myself in a position to be harmed and others. I had harmed other people. And all of this was taking actions based on self that placed myself in a position to be harmed. I wanted, if they would just love me enough, give me enough attention, then I would be okay. I didn't realize that all of this was going to have to be that I was going to have to rely on God and depend on God, and these people could not make me happy. They couldn't fill that huge God hole that I had. And what happened is I had to also, on that harms done list, is I had to inventory how I had harmed a child, that I had had an abortion 2 years sober in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And one of the things that happened, Bob and I were doing this, I hadn't even ever shared that. And this happens, and Bob was talking about the best way to do a 4-step, and the best way to do the steps is take somebody else through the steps. I've had people come up to me and say, "I want you to do the steps with me. I want a new experience." And I just look at them, if you want a new experience, go take somebody else through the steps. That's the best way you're going to get an experience. And it works when you do stuff like this. If you're asked to do something like this in Alcoholics Anonymous, by all means do it. You'll learn more than there's anything I'm going to ever tell you about. I'm going to learn more. And in doing this, we were in Columbus, Ohio, doing this very thing. And out of nowhere, I announced that I was 2 years sober, 38 years old, and had had an abortion in Alcoholics Anonymous because of having all of these affairs in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't intend to say that. I never had said it before. Women I sponsored knew about it, but it was something I just shared one-to-one. I never had let that out. And as a result of that, what has happened is that many women have come up to me after sharing that and have said, "I have that same secret, and I've not even been able to tell my sponsor. I am so ashamed of that." And the deal is that I understood that. that I understood because until I had, until I had shared that with everybody, I didn't realize how long it was before I told Dottie, how long she had sponsored me before I ever told her that. Because I was too embarrassed. Somehow or another, I know that it's not the truth, but in my mind, in my twisted mind it's that, you hear women have abortions all the time, drinking. But it's something different if you have it sober. And what had happened was, it doesn't change. It's still the same whether we're drinking or sober. But all I can say is I can do things sober worse than I can do drinking. And do it sober. I'm capable of doing that. I'm a human being. I'm capable of doing those things. I didn't have affairs drinking. I had them sober. I didn't do that when I was drinking. I didn't get off the sofa long enough to have an affair. We can do these things drinking, that I can do them sober. And one of the things that has been my lesson and the things that I've had to learn in Alcoholics Anonymous is all except for, well, not all except, because I harmed my husband because he was sick and what I did for my children. But I have done some very, very shameful things sober in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what I know is that, thank God, talked about, oh my God, I've been gossiped about. Probably most of us have. That's what we do. We talk about each other around here. But what I'm grateful for is that today I know whether it's drinking or sober, my past is my greatest asset. And that if I am willing to share that past, honestly, in a general way, I'm not going to give you a bunch of details, but if I'm honestly willing to share that in a general way, it can help others. Probably sober, I went bankrupt. Sober, I lost a home. Sober, I did those things. Very shameful things. I thought if these things are happening to me, people are going to say, what step are you working on? How come these things are happening to you and you're 16 and 17 years sober? But I've learned that I have to inventory these things. I had to do an inventory, financial inventory, 16 and 17 years sober. What we did that caused all of that bankruptcy and everything to happen was very good intentions. It was still the wrong action. The intention was, my husband is a computer scientist. He would find another job. We just didn't, and so we tried to save our house by paying it with credit cards. The deal is that inventory it and find out that what the deal is you don't spend money you don't have, regardless of what the intentions are. Take actions to place myself. Here we were trying selfishly save our house. I can't let go of my house. But had I been willing to do that at the beginning, the whole situation may have been a lot different. So these inventories are amazing. We can take inventories, spot check inventories, stay around here. You can take inventories on relationships, on financial situations. There's on jobs. We can take, an inventory on, why do I always find myself dissatisfied in this job? What am I doing that's always causing this? These inventories are amazing, but in order to get to the other inventories that are going to follow along the line, and I use this process all the time in my life. We've got to do the first one, which is lay down the first set of resentments, the first set of fears, and the first set of harms done and sex inventory. These are the things that I need to do to get to know myself. And that's what it is, to get to know who I really am. And what I find out is that, you know, I've got all this sickness, but I can get better. And what happens is I'm not going to get better until I own it. And one of the things that I think makes the difference in us and the, you know, psychological efforts or psychiatric efforts is if we're doing this inventory, we cannot remain a victim. Because what happens is I am a participant in my life and I make mistakes. Yes, maybe people made more mistakes and harmed me more, but that doesn't mean I didn't harm them. And I need to be responsible for the things I've done. And usually what I find out is the reason I resent it, and it makes me so, as Sandy Beach says, disturbed. And he said, my life today is I want to be undisturbed. And the way I'm going to be undisturbed is find out what's disturbing me, like resentments, fears. I need to find out what's disturbing me, take a look at it, inventory it, and be responsible for my mistakes in my own life, and I will start to be undisturbed. And, you know, I don't know. At my age, I'm just not willing to have the drama in my life that I used to have. I just don't find all that calamity a lot of fun anymore. I just don't need all that drama in my life. And we were talking about that earlier, Bob and I. I like things peaceful today. I'm not a fighter. I don't want a lot of fighting and bickering and calamity in my life today. And if I don't want that, I need to take a look at why I've got it and be willing to be responsible for my own mistakes and see where I'm wrong and be willing to take a look at that and make amends and be responsible. Because, you know, and I'm like Bob. I try to, you know, have restraint of pen and tongue today, because I just don't want to make a lot of amends. That part, I can look at the inventory and I can be responsible. I'm just not real fond of that other part of having to go tell people how I've wronged them. So, and that, I think that comes with just doing this. Again, that repetition strengthens and confirms, and faith then comes naturally if we just keep doing it and doing it. And I'm grateful for that today. I'm grateful for this process. And that's what it is. It's a process. And these inventories are a process for me to look at where I'm wrong and be able to take actions in order to amend it and make it right. And that process keeps me undisturbed. So, Bob.
Let's take a 9-minute break. Alcoholic. Well, I got to tell you a little story.
I love it. That's my favorite thing Bob does is storytelling.
Paulie's a professed Southern Baptist. And I've been down south a lot, and there's Southern Baptists and there's Southern Baptists. And the Southern Baptists notice the sins of the Southern Baptists easily. And I was down in Mississippi to a conference, and a couple picked me up at the airport. Nice couple. Really very nice people. But they were Southern Baptists. Get to the hotel, and we're checking in. There's a little sign on the registration desk, and it says, adult X-rated movies in the rooms. And I could see them looking at that sign. Not good. They were angst by the obvious sin in front of them. And I'm a bit of a people pleaser, I suppose, at times. It's one of my defects. And I wanted to make points with these people. So I'm looking at the woman, looking at the sign. I called the manager. I was, excuse me, sir. I said, pointed at the sign. I said, I want the pornography in my hotel room to be disabled. And he said, you sicko, we only have regular pornography in this hotel. It kind of, you can watch it's people getting it. It's like, oh! Somebody will be driving home tonight going, ha ha! You'll picture the wheelchairs and the, all right.
How do they do it?
Yeah, okay. Don't shoot the messenger, please. That brings us to in my case, a much-needed step 6 and 7. I'm not going to talk about step 5, except the book says do it. Do it, or you might not stay sober. Very good reason.
Yeah.
Do it with a closed-mouth person, because you need to tell everything. You need to can't hold nothing back. And that brings us to step 6. I think step 6, one of the guys I sponsored referred to step 6 as the Judas step. And what he meant by that is if you're 20 years sober and something has betrayed you in your program, it's probably step 6. That you think you've done it when you haven't. The wording of it sounds so simple. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects. It sounds very simple, but it's a big deal. I think that the story of most of the last 34 years has been the story of my 6th step, basically. Clancy tells a great story. He says that we come to Alcoholics Anonymous, and because of we're beaten half to death by alcoholism, we throw in the towel. And then somewhere in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, we get enough self-esteem to be dangerous, and we sneak it back. And we'll spend the rest of our lives tearing off little pieces of it and throwing it in. The gambling and the shopping and the eating and the various different things that we try to replace alcohol with, and the judgments and the gossip, etc., etc., etc. So how do we become entirely ready? There's a passage in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions where it talks about why none of us ever do that completely in all areas of our life. And it says it's probably, and I think this is true, probably because we don't hit the same bottom with our defects of character that we hit with alcohol. And consequently, we're not driven into the same amount of actions. I know absolutely, I've experienced it with many things in sobriety. If I can get to a place where I will make a defect of character as big a piece of spiritual business as my drinking was when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, that God removes it, but it'll take that much action. I don't know about you guys, but when I got sober, I went to 2 meetings a day. I called my sponsor. I prayed about it. I talked about it. I read about it. It was a big piece of business in my life. And if I can do the same thing with a defective character, as I've done for quite a few things, that I am absolutely, absolutely powerless over God. If I can express entirely ready by my actions, it gets removed. That's the hard part. And I discovered, I did something that is not unusual in Alcoholics Anonymous. I did my first 5 steps and then sort of skipped step 6. I didn't know there was a prayer. There's actually a 6-step prayer. I didn't see it because it doesn't say prayer with an arrow. But it's at the very last line in the first paragraph on page 76. It says, if we still cling to something, we will not let go. We ask God to help us be willing. I never said the prayer. And what I did what a lot of us do. I saw that all these things were objectionable, and I tried to use submission of will to control this stuff. And I tried to willfully suppress these defects of character. It was funny. I was at a meeting at noon on Friday, and I heard a guy. Now, this is almost 3,000 miles away from Las Vegas. I heard a guy in a noon meeting talk about the exact same thing, the analogy that I use, 3,000 miles away. And I've had that experience all over the world. And it's like all of a sudden a guy at one place in one country will come to this is like this. And another guy in another 5,000 miles away, this is like, they'll see the exact same thing. And I've come to believe that what Carl Jung said was right, and we have our own deal here. We have our own collective unconscious. And I believe that. I think that there is, it seems at times almost as if there is a universal mind, a universal alcoholic mind. And I've had these experiences, as I bet you a lot of you have. You ever sit in a meeting and a stranger is sharing something that you've never heard before intellectually? This is new information. And yet, when they say it, it feels like you've known it all your life and you never heard it before. Mm-hmm. As if it taps into something that was deep down, some kind of great reality deep down within me. Some people call that God consciousness. In the book on page 55, it talks about that. Carl Jung referred to it as the collective unconscious. Whatever it is, it seems to resonate in all of us. That's why when you sit in you can sit in a meeting and sometimes people will say things and it's just, oh my God, it's just like, it's crazy. And where was I going? Too young for Alzheimer's. Anyway, so how do we become entirely ready? Well, I started try to willfully suppress some of this stuff, and the analogy I heard in the meeting is exactly what happened to me. It's like these defects. If you use self-will to suppress them, they will pop up some other way. Mm-hmm. It's almost like that arcade game the kids play where they hit whack-a-mole. You hit a wall here and it pops up over there. Mm-hmm. Later on in the book, Bill uses this analogy for drinking, but I think it's also true for every defect of character. He said when you willfully suppress these urges, the result is usually a bigger explosion than ever. And we've all had experiences, either personally or with people we sponsor, where they will willfully suppress some deviant, objectionable behavior, and they will do it, and it seems to gain torque. And then when they run out of power, they have an episode. They blow up, and they act out on it. And it's almost like you're good I like being good, but I kind of outgood myself or something. I don't, you know what I mean? It's like a slingshot. I'm good. I'm really good. I'm so good. I can see that you're not. I am really good. And then I run out of power and I go so far the other way that it's nuts. Some of the worst things that have happened in my life has been a result of willfully trying to suppress things. Because when it says in the book, lack of power is my dilemma, they're not kidding. I have to have God's help. And in order to get God's help, I have to be entirely ready. There's an old adage that without Him, I can't. But without me, He won't. Because His first gift to me is free will. And I must surrender my will in order to get his help. He will not take my free will away from me. We're the only creatures on earth that have that. I'll go out in the woods. You'll never see a deer with a brown paper bag and a crack pipe. I mean, you just won't see it. Because they cannot do anything against their nature, and their nature is God's idea of a deer, and God's idea of a bird, and God's idea of a fish. But we're the only creatures on earth that we have God's idea of Bob, and then there's, unfortunately, Bob's idea of Bob. And they're often in conflict with each other. Because in the third step, it says something beautiful. It says, first of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. And so I have to become entirely ready and let God do something. And all my defects of character really and truly are just simply defective defense mechanisms against a world that just scares the hell out of me at times. A world that at times seems very lonely and desolate and frightening. A world that I just try to defend myself against. Every defective character, anger's like that. I used anger to protect myself against when I'm threatened. Lust is simply a defense mechanism against a life that I'm afraid is going to be uneventful and boring and lonely. And so some of us settle for lust because we don't know what else to do. And it buys us little moments of feeling connected, always followed by disillusionment and more loneliness. Because that's not what we're really looking for. But it's a defense mechanism. Greed is just my defense mechanism against my fear that there won't be enough for me. As if there is such a thing as enough for a guy like me. And so these defects at one time possibly worked. You know, anger and that kind. When you're a little kid, 3 years old, and you're not getting your way, a temper tantrum, if thrown properly, and we learn the art of this, thrown properly can eventually make your parents cave, or the teacher, somebody cave, and you get your own way. It's kind of cute, almost. At 23 years old, it's not cute. But what do? We dress it up. We dress it up in either passive aggressiveness, or we dress it up in anger, or being on the muscle around people, intimidation, and it doesn't protect me. It just turns people more against me, because for every action in the universe, there's an opposite and equal reaction. And now I feel more threatened because I'm stepping on people's toes with my anger. My defense mechanism is activating things in other people that are causing me more fear. It says that in the book. It says sometimes, when it's talking about fear, it says that sometimes fear will set in motion trains of circumstances which will bring us misfortune that we felt we didn't deserve, but did not we ourselves set the ball rolling. And I underneath every defect of character is self-centered fear. It talks about that in step 7 in the 12 steps and 12 traditions, that the chief activator of all my defects of character is self-centered fear. Fear is the muscle of the ego. Mm-hmm. You want to see me lie? Scare me. Get me afraid of what you're going to think of me. Get me afraid of confrontation. Get me afraid of rejection or abandonment. I'm capable of lying to you. I may have to come back later and make amends, but you scare me, I can lie to you. You get me financially scared enough, and I'll start wiggling around and doing things that are against my principles. I compromise my own honesty. You get me scared enough. So fear is the muscle of the ego. I want to get a guy like me to jump through hoops and break my principles and go against my ethic and and go counter to the intuitive sense of right and wrong, the God consciousness within me. You want to get me to go against that? Scare me. Scare me. And I will. A lot of the problems in my life, in my sobriety, have been caused by self-centered fear. It's the book says we're driven by it, by 100 forms of it. So how do you, these things that are defective, that may have worked at one time, that don't work anymore, how do you become entirely ready? Well, I think we have to I think it's an awakening. It's an awakening to the truth. That there really is no value in this. That this defense mechanism, anger, or the defense mechanism of lust or dishonesty or whatever, or even into different types of other behavior, such as gambling or different eating deals. And I've used this process for so many things in sobriety. I remember the first time I ever did it, I started making it a piece of business and praying about it. I prayed about it every day. 6 months, probably 7, I don't know. It was quite a few months before something happened. First thing I ever did it with was cigarettes. I could not quit smoking. I could not. I'm telling you, I tried. I tried 3 times and I failed miserably. And every single time I just thought, I can't do this. I don't have what it takes to quit smoking. All I did was make myself and everybody around me miserable. I had people in AA at about 2 weeks away from a cigarette offering to buy me a pack of cigarettes. You're just a pain in the ass. I mean, I was going to, I couldn't quit. So I quit quitting. And I just started asking God every single day for the desire not to smoke. Same thing happened to me with gambling. I couldn't stop. I needed to stop. I wanted to stop. I knew I should stop. I couldn't stop. About 6 months. Praying every day. Some of us, how long do some of us have to pray and go to meetings before we really know that the obsession to drink is removed? God works slow. He's old. You got to give him a break. He really is old. And grace is a funny thing, and that's what I think we do in Alcoholics Anonymous is we access grace. And grace, you don't know when transition happens. It's very much like we had this marijuana back in the 70s when I was a kid. It's called creeper pot. Now, creeper pot was very odd. Every once in a while, you'd get creeper pot. I remember the first time I ever encountered creeper pot. I went to this guy, and I bought a lid of this creeper pot. I took it home, and I'm smoking the hell out of it. Smoking. Nothing. I'm getting pissed. This guy has ripped me off. Now I'm angst up. Now I'm going to go over, and I'm going to tear into this guy, and I'm going to get my money back. I get about halfway to where he lives, and I just had to sit down on the curb and watch the colors. And how did that happen? Where did all of this just creeps up on you? And all of a sudden it's like, wow. It's like, oh, this is amazing. I mean, and some of us, we are changed by God's grace. And you can't pinpoint when that happened. You just look back. And something's happened to me. I'm free of something that I could never get free of. The ego wants to jump in right away and take credit for it. I'm the kind of guy, I'll beg God for months to take something away. He'll take it away. I'll go to meetings and take credit for it. Just tell everybody how I just learned my lesson. Didn't learn nothing. Didn't learn nothing. So sometimes we have to exhaust some of this stuff. And sometimes you pray for it. You ask for the willingness. I saw a TV show when I was a kid, and it was called Rescue 8. And there was this one episode. It's odd how I remember these things, but there was this one episode, and the Rescue 8 was about these 2 paramedics that worked out of a firehouse, and they would go out on distress calls when people are in trouble. Well, this one particular episode, these 2 guys go out on this call, and they get to this scene, and there's this cute little girl, and she's crying hysterically, and her arm is wedged up into a vending machine, and she can't get it out. And they try to get it out, and it just hurts her. And now her parents are there, and her parents are very upset, and the 2 paramedics, they don't know what to do, and the fire trucks are pulling up. Now the firemen are pulling off. saws and acetylene torches, and they're talking about cutting the door around her arm and stuff. And this is freaking her out. She's just like this little girl. She's scared looking at all this equipment, these firemen, all these outfits, and the parents are getting upset. And the one paramedic's watching the whole thing. And he kneels down next to her and he says to her, he says, "Sweetheart, you got something in your hand?" She goes, "Uh-huh." "What do you got in your hand?" "It's a candy bar." "Well, would you let go?" "No, it's my candy bar. It's my candy bar. It's my candy bar. It's my gambling. It's my sugar. It's my resentment. It's my judgment. It's my gossip. It's my... She won't let go of it. And he doesn't know what to do. And she's hell-bent on holding on to that candy bar. He backs away. Stands there for about a minute, and he kneels down next to her again. He says, "Sweetheart, I'll make you a promise." She says, "What?" He says, "I promise you, if you'll let go of that candy bar, I will give you 2 candy bars." And she says, "Really?" He says, "I promise you." And because she trusts, she lets go of the candy bar and her arm slides out of the vending machine. What's your candy bar? And do you trust God? Can you really buy the idea that God's idea of you is better than your idea of you? And the only way to get any perspective on that is to say things to yourself like Clint used to say all the time, my friend Clint Hodges. You have to ask yourself certain questions. So, your idea of you, how's that working for you? It's funny, we never ask ourselves the right questions, do we? We never do. Right? How's that working for you? If you're like me, you're disillusioned and you're vacant and you're tired. Trying to wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world is tiring. It's tiring. Trying to protect and defend yourself is tiring. There was a period of about a couple months, several months, when it was the last time my parents let me into their house. And I had burnt my life to the ground. It was one of those series of events where I lost the relationship, the place to live, the job, everything in one fell swoop. It was a bad drunk, bad one. And I got pushed in this shame and self-loathing. I got pushed into this state of abstinence and begged my mother and father to let me stay at their house the last time they ever let me stay there. And on the condition I could not drink. I don't suffer untreated alcoholism and abstinence well. And I ended up having a nervous breakdown. And I'll tell you something, there is a very thin line between nervous breakdown and surrender. They're almost identical. And the problem is that my mother had these ins with mental health because she was a therapist, and I didn't surrender. I went and medicated the pain and bled it off and never did have the surrender. God was breaking me, and I stopped the process. And I ended up in a psychiatrist's office. He diagnosed me as having free-floating anxiety and panic disorder, which I found out later it's the anxiety of playing God. If you're like me, when you play God, it's too much. I love that line in the Fear Inventory. It says, "We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves." I don't have it's like in electricity. I don't have the capacity to carry the load of my life. For me to be the center of my life and have all of it my responsibility, oh my God, it's overwhelming. There's a whole world out there full of people. They're all thinking crap. I don't know what they're thinking, but I suspect it's about me. You got to figure it out. You got to watch them. Got to watch them close. They're going to turn on you any second. You don't know. You're up to something. I can tell. Everybody's out doing something. And it's like going into your laundry room where you have the dryer plugged into a 220 line and getting the 110 volt appliance out of the kitchen and plugging into the 220 line. It'll just burn it right out. And it kind of feels like that when you're the center of your life and everything is in your hands and you don't have a God. It's overwhelming. It's just too much. I remember there was a gal in my home group 30 years ago. She came into a meeting. She was sober about 4 weeks, maybe. I don't know, for a little while. She's been out there without working steps, doing nothing, just trying to protect herself from life. And she come to the meetings. And I said to her, I said, Johan, how you doing? She went, it's too big. Oh, I knew exactly what she meant. It's too big. It's too big. So I trust infinite God rather than my finite self. I must let go. Do I trust God? What are the choices? What are the choices? I tell you, it's taken me 30 years or more. Stuff doesn't work quick for me. I'm a slow study, but I'm finally at a point where I know the trust is really amazing in my life today. My ability to rely on God is become very concrete. I've been faced with situations in my life that I cannot surmount, and I can't get rid of the things inside of me that are messing me up. And I've done the work. I've kept it a piece of spiritual business day in and day out. And God has every single time, if I keep doing it and I persist, I get changed. I love that line in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. It said that the only people that will ever scoff at prayer are those who haven't tried it enough. See, we're spoiled by alcohol. Alcohol is quick, instantaneous grace. You don't have to work for it. I got as much effect out of a glass of whiskey as I get out of 6 months of prayer. I don't have to do all that. Just here, it's good. I'm good now. Thanks God. It's amazing. It's amazing. And it spoils you because we get that instantaneous thing. And God works a little slower than that. But what a tremendous sense of security to know that He always works. That anytime there's something in the way of that gets between me and Him and me and His kids, if I persist and ask Him to take it away, He does. Now, it may come back. The problem with defects of character and grace is like a thin spiritual veneer between me and that deal. And self-centered fear, enough self-centered fear and angst can crack that veneer open. That's why you can be free of stuff for years in Alcoholics Anonymous and have it come. And if you forget that it's a piece of business in your life and you relax into a state of complacency with that deal and it comes back. We all see that. I had an experience with gambling. I had a year and a half sober. I hit a tremendous bottom with gambling. Didn't gamble for 20-some years. And I retired, and I had a whole lot of money, a couple $1 million to invest. And I thought, stock market's not really like gambling. Which is probably true if you don't have an alcoholic personality. But oh my God, within 6 months, I'm 8 hours a day on the computer. I'm on margin now for $1 million. That'll keep you up nights. It just took me over because it returned because I'd relaxed into such a state of, when it says in step 10, it's easy to let up on the spiritual program of action. And how much like what I do for my alcoholism and drinking is the same thing I do for my defects of character. And the same thing happens if contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition, I can be placed in a position of neutrality even from those things. Not just drinking, even from those things. But I'm not cured of them. They will always have to be a piece of business with me, or they can return. And I like that. I'll tell you, there's a tremendous sense of security in me, in this deal for me. Alcohol, I love that line, the shortest paragraph in the whole book. It works. It really does. It really does. They're not just being dramatic when they say that. This is based on the experience of our membership that have tried this. And the only people that doubt that this stuff really works are the people that haven't done it. Do it. Do it. What do you got to lose? If I do nothing this weekend except maybe light a little bit of a fire under one person in this room that's going to up their game here a little bit, I think maybe I've done something good. If I can just get one person to turn the volume up on their own actions in Alcoholics Anonymous this weekend, maybe I've done something good. Just one person. Because I'm going to save you a lot of pain, and consequently, you're going to help people. And that has rippling effects that are amazing, amazing. And then the 7-step prayer is such a remarkable prayer. It's a reiteration from a different point of view of what we said in the 3rd-step prayer. I'm asking God, remarkably, and Bill Wilson just amazes me how he comes up with this stuff. This had to be divinely inspired. No self-centered alcoholic can ever think of this crap. No, I mean, he couldn't. Do you think? He says, he's asking God, he tells us to ask God to take away every single defect of character that stands in the way of our usefulness. Usefulness, that might be 10th on my list of things. I mean, I'd want happy, rich and famous. I'd want notoriety and prestige. I'd want people to realize how wonderful I mean, useful I don't even think useful would have been on the list. I don't even think, get me happy, rich and famous. I might help some people, but let's do the important stuff first. I mean, but useful is the juice. Useful is the juice. I've known some happiness in my life. I got to tell you something. It's very fleeting. I don't know why. I just have one of those personalities. The shine wears off stuff quickly. But you live a life immersed in sponsoring people and doing service and having commitments in Alcoholics Anonymous. You will realize that your life is not even your own, and there's a joy in that. It's not even yours. You don't have to worry about it. It's not your life. You serve. You're a servant. And usefulness will allow you to put your head on the pillow at night and sleep good. Usefulness will allow you a sense of connectedness and rightness about your life, as if everything is exactly the way. When I'm doing what I've been divinely crafted to do by God working through my alcoholism and my own pain and suffering and experience to be useful, boy, everything's right. I know there's people in here that are new, that probably have deep, dark, horrific secrets you'd like to take to the grave. I'm telling you, in Alcoholics Anonymous, those will become some of your most cherished assets. There'll be a rightness. The things you hate about you now, you'll be grateful for in time, because you'll use them to help other people. The things you're ashamed of. It's like my whole life just reassorts into, and there's a rightness about it. I am divinely crafted by my own experience to be uniquely useful to people that are sick like I'm sick. Now, I can't help everybody, but I'm good with people who are twisted like I'm twisted. I'm real good, because all my experience now comes to bear in useful service. I started saying a prayer many years ago, and I say it to this day intermittently, and I ask God for a servant's heart. Mm-hmm. And you know why? Because I get something. I get that I've never felt better and more complete and more right and more free than when I'm serving. There's an old a story we read in English Lit when I was a kid in high school. Paradise Lost, in Milton's Paradise Lost, there's a passage where Lucifer had cast himself out of heaven through his own self-will. And his departing remark is, he shook his fist at God and the angels in heaven. He said, "I'd rather reign in hell than serve in heaven." And those of you who have reigned for a while, it feels like hell, don't it? And those of you that have served, it feels like heaven. And I want a servant's heart. Because I'm selfish. Because I like me better as a servant than I ever liked me as a reigner. I feel better. I'm more right with me and more right with you and more right with God. And when you're right, you're right. When you're not, you're not. And some of us choose other paths. I have several friends in Alcoholics Anonymous that have chosen, as it talks about the family afterwards, instead of the spiritual path, the path of material gain, under the illusion that if you got enough good stuff in your life, you'd feel good. As if you can change your insides by outside stuff, and you can't. You cannot change inside vacancies with outside. You can't fill inside vacancies with outside stuff. It's a delusion. And some of us hit terrible bottoms with that stuff. I have. You get to that point where you know that no matter how good you get it out here, if it ain't no good in here, it ain't no good. It ain't no good. And so we serve. I want God to take away the things that stand in the way of my usefulness. Use me. Use me. I love the Lord's Prayer. There's a movement in Alcoholics Anonymous to do away with it and replace it with the Serenity Prayer, which does not line up with our 11th step. The Lord's Prayer does. In the Serenity Prayer, I'm giving God direction. I'm telling Him what to do. I'm not praying only for knowledge. I'm telling Him what to do. I'm saying, God, grant me this. Give me this. Give me that. Give me this. Take a knee, God. I want you to do this. I don't want to have an opinion. You can measure the distance from my surrender and the distance I am from the decision in step 3 by the amount of opinions in my life and the amount of judgments. Sometimes it's horrific. Sometimes surrender's somewhere out in the horizon and I'm over here. And then there are other times where I should have a tent and a tambourine. I'm just... And it always kind of moves, doesn't it? None of us ever stay. It just kind of, it's like the waves. It kind of comes and goes. If I stay in the game, I work with my sponsor, I work with the sponsees, I do certain things. I have routines in the morning, page 86, at night, 86 and 87 in the morning. I do all those things just so that I can grow in understanding and effectiveness. My real purpose is to become of maximum service to God and the people about me. Isn't that amazing? Most of us come here, we want to help ourselves, and we realize that's the problem. We're not here to help ourselves. We're here to lose ourselves and help others. Holly.
Gosh, thank you so much, Bob. On step 6 and 7, one of the things, I love all the things that Bob said about that, so I'm going to do some little exercises that I do with step 6 when I work with the women I sponsor. Again, most of the things that I do are the things that were done for me or that I've learned here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And what I do, when I was doing my 5th step, Frank was just kind of writing down my character defects as I was doing, especially when I was doing the 4th column. He was just kind of writing down my character defects. And I do that with the women I sponsor. I don't really have any problem letting them know the character defects that I see. And I think that that's what we need to do, is help each other. And if I